So, Nancy, we've heard a lot of wonderful things about the wine industry today, but I was hoping that you could tell me a little bit about Salud.
Salud is an annual auction. Salud means to your health. It's an auction that we sell our finest wines and raise a lot of money, and all of the money goes to our local vineyard workers. These are people who make the wine possible. Without them, we would have no wine. And we feel that because farm workers have no benefits, they are not protected by any labor laws, that we have an obligation as the winery owners, the people who enjoy the wines, to take some responsibility for their health care. It's an extremely innovative, imaginative program not done anywhere else.
The other thing I found interesting about Salud is that isn't it a collaboration between the vineyards and a hospital?
Exactly. It's a wonderful collaboration between an independent hospital here and many of the winemakers throughout the Willamette Valley and some local businesses who see the benefit of this very innovative program.
So the region has really joined together to create this wonderful service.
Yes, it's been quite an amazing development. It's been going on well over 10 years now, from just totally inventing it to now reaching so many people. And it's not only the workers, but it's their families. We run well baby clinics and dental clinics for children and that sort of thing. It's also being used as a model. We have received awards throughout the West as a model for businesses to take care of their workers in a really appropriate way.
Now, I mean, this is a fabulous program. I'm sure the minute you started it, the farm workers were just overjoyed.
As a matter of fact, it took us a number of years to get the farm workers to cooperate. When you realize that many of the farm workers, most of our farm workers now live here, but we still have migrant workers, and they haven't been treated really well by institutional people, and we're part of that group. So it took a number of years to win over their trust, to realize that what we wanted to do was give them preventive health care, and not only preventive, but we take care of them all the way down the line, but that we really wanted to do this and not do something bad at the same time. It took a number of different workers to go out and establish that trust, and the people who actually deliver the service are saints.
Well, is it a popular program now among the workers?
The workers love the program. They depend on it. As a matter of fact, they have a telephone number that they can call 24 hours a day. If they have a baby crying at home, they have a person they can call. Some ways I'm almost, beginning to envy the service that they're getting. We're currently reaching almost 900 workers throughout, and their families throughout the Willamette Valley. It's very hard to know even what the population is, but we have focused on the vineyard workers. They have a special identity card when they go into a clinic. It identifies them as a vineyard worker. This gives them special entree, and it, of course, greatly reduces whatever they may have to pay.
Now, Nancy, you've seen the wine business in Oregon evolve. Marketing has been a huge element of this. Can you tell us a little bit about where marketing came from, where it is now, and where it's going?
Well, where it came from was nowhere, because in the beginning days, I don't think that any of us in the beginning days had any idea of marketing. We were going to raise grapes and make wine and live happily ever after. We realized after a few years that there was another element there, that we had to sell it. And we learned on the job. I don't think, perhaps there's some professional people now that actually had education in marketing in the business, but most of us learned just by doing it. And those of us that learned are still in the business. So that's sort of where it's gone. You either learned how to market or you didn't. I have come to realize that any field of marketing, the marketing is probably more than 50% of the product, whatever it is you're dealing in. And there's an element of show business involved, that if you can't put on the program and keep up the image and do all of this, it really doesn't matter how good your product is, whether it's wine or perfume or a bunch of flowers. So we've learned a lot. On the other hand, here in Oregon, we haven't had the resources. Nobody had money to hire a public relations or an advertising firm. It didn't happen that way, so we had to come up with our own ideas. And I'm so proud of what we've come up with. It's the programs that we have invented and worked together to make happen have been extremely successful.
Such as?
Such as our, well, the very beginning of marketing, which instead of going out and doing a tasting and trying to sell, we went out as a group. We put on a show, and it was a very honest, grassroots sort of show that was quite appealing, because instead of people coming out and doing the deal, taste this wine, you're going to love it, we can give you a great deal, we came out as 5 or 6 people traveling together and saying, look at this wine's good, but you know, have you tried Joe's? Joe's is really good. And this was such a fresh approach, because we were so naive and totally honest about what we were doing. It worked very well, and they not only tasted our wines, but they liked us and they liked our wines, and they bought it.
Do you think that's the most innovative thing you've done, or is there something else?
Oh, there's many things that we've done. A lot of the things have been to bring people to Oregon. We found out early on that a lot of people in this big country don't know where Oregon is. And even when we tell them, they still think we're sort of near the North Pole or something. So our best thing is to bring people to Oregon and get a taste of it. We started the International Pinot Noir celebration a number of years ago, which has been great for Oregon, but even more importantly, it's been phenomenal for the variety of Pinot Noir. I think without that focus, it's the only wine festival in the world, and there's hundreds of wine festivals in the world. This is the only one that focuses on Pinot Noir. When we first started it, it was crazy. Nobody even wanted to drink Pinot Noir. Now, of course, we have to have a lottery system to determine who gets to come every year. We also, of course, the Salud program has been, it's not quite in that same category as marketing, because it's more of a communal responsibility. Yeah, you know, we still are selling wine, and people have to like our wines very much and like the glamour associated with them to pay, you know, $300 or $400 per bottle for them. That's been a great thing. We have taken that on the road and used it somewhat for marketing. The program, the Oregon Pinot Camp program, is probably the most innovative regional marketing program, wine marketing program that I've encountered. It's managed to bring people here, teach them about Oregon. The people who attend learn more than they will ever learn from somebody going into their shop or their establishment, wherever it is throughout the country, by just coming here. And they have a great time while they're doing it, which is probably the most important of all.
Well, you've been around the wine business long enough to see the evolution of it. Can you talk a little bit about where it started and where it is today?
Of course, it started a little over 30 years ago from nothing, just a few idealists who wanted to, as I said, grow grapes. And literally went from 0 to 252 at this point in time. More seem to be coming in every day. I'm always amazed at the new labels I come across. It has had tremendous effect on agriculture in Oregon. Agriculture has certainly attained a new status because of the wine business. The wine business is, we are farmers, that's what we are, we're in agriculture, but nonetheless, the wine business is not quite the same as hay, or even tomatoes, or even string beans. It has another world to it, a glamour to it, that the state has recognized and taken advantage of. I mean, they're very proud to show our wines. This is, as you'll see, many of the things throughout the state are using vineyards and grapes and things as their background. They want to be known as a wine region because it's very appealing, and it's a relatively clean industry. We don't, we're, of course, most people within the industry are very, very conscious of sustaining their place, their environment, their workers, all of this. But nonetheless, even as it is, it's a very clean industry, so again, very appealing to the state, economic development, and all those kind of establishment sort of things. So we bring a lot to the state. We bring a lot to just the economy itself, flat out. It's not only the wine business, but we spend a lot of money within the state in order to keep our businesses going. We have to buy tanks and hoses and compressors and all kinds of things, so there's another economy, a spin-off economy from the fact that we're all in business.
Okay, now, all right, so you got here and you stuck a plant in the ground and it just grew, right? And it was easy from the beginning. The wine business is easy.
The wine business, the wine business is anything but easy. Until we went into the restaurant business, I thought it was probably the most difficult business in the world. I've kind of changed my opinion, not having done a hotel. But it's a very difficult business because whatever it is, all the glamour associated with it, all the stuff and sitting around and tasting wine and making remarks. We are farmers and we're dependent on nature. In Oregon, we're dependent on nature to a much greater degree than many other wine regions in the world. So if we have a bad year, we have a bad year. You only get one chance a year to make the wine. Something happens in the winery, something goes bad, the electricity goes off for a week, you're wiped out. You can't make it up until the next year comes. And like most agriculture, when you have a really good year, everybody else does too. So there's that kind of thing.
Your family in this business?
Oh, yes. Yes.
What was that like?
You want me to do that in 2 words? Let me see. To raise your family in a family business is a great juggling act because you're always at work. Everybody's always at work. The kids have to be there because it's a family business and this is what you do. If they don't like it, well, they still have to do it. In our case, our children were 2, 4, and 6 when we moved to Oregon, although we'd been making wine, but they were little kids, so they have totally grown up with us. One of their difficulties was going to school. This was the natural thing to them. However, at that time, there being no wineries in Oregon, it was a very odd thing to do, that your parents grew grapes and they drank wine a lot. It's very odd. Our daughter relates that she didn't really realize that grapes were edible. She thought that that's what you grew them for, was to make wine. Our children were not forced to work in the winery, but if they wanted to make any money, they had to work at the winery. It was always there, so they worked. And what they learned is they hated the winery. So they all went off to school and they all learned things that they could do, and they went off into the world. And what they found out is if you're going to work really hard, maybe it's a good idea to work for yourself. So they came back to the winery, and right now our 3 adult children are full owners of the winery, and they take care of everything.
Your daughter Louisa?
Yes, we have 2 daughters and a son. Our daughter Louisa, it's nice that they each found a way to go, because otherwise you've got brother and sister trying to fight over the same turf like they do when they're 8 years old. It doesn't change too much. But our one daughter was more scientifically oriented, Louisa. She's now the winemaker. She has been the winemaker for over 10 years, making tremendous wines. One of the really nice developments of this industry is not only our own family that's taken over our winery, but many of the other second generation have come into it as well. They are taking it on in a very serious fashion. Most of them, like our children, realized that it was a hard way to go. It was not an easy decision to come into family business, particularly a winery, but there are several now that have taken on major responsibilities. And one of the things that pleases me a lot is they work together just like we did. Many of the second generation are working in major roles within wineries throughout the valley. They have to take on the jobs of marketing, cooperative marketing. They have to take on the jobs of filling in all these roles in the trade organizations. They have to take on legislative responsibilities. There's always that happening. There are continuous visits from people. They have to work together to organize what's happening to make the best. And most of them work always for the best of Oregon. They have that same sense that they're working for the good of the industry, not just the good of their personal winery.
And that's something that they actually learned from the first generation, is that there was a really cooperative, a real camaraderie among the winemakers.
Sure, because they grew up with this as an example, that we were constantly working with each other, that this is how it had to work, because we didn't have the other resources to hire people, so we had to do everything ourselves. And this is what I see that they're doing, is taking on amazing new roles. It's in many senses even more difficult now. The marketing aspects are much more difficult than they were 15 years ago, and they're up for it. They are taking on new vineyards, new varieties. They have to deal with markets that we never thought of, and they're doing a great job, and they talk to each other about it to make it succeed.
In 1960, there were no wineries. 2004, there are 252. What do you think about that?
It's very, in a sense, it's very rewarding. It's amazing that this has happened, that so many people have seen that this is an endeavor that is worth spending their life at. I think that, like anything, some people are more serious and come much better prepared. There are still people who can come into the business in Oregon who look at it as a total romance, and it will be a romance for a while. There's a lot of excitement going on with the different people coming in. Each person, of course, each winery that begins brings something to the mix, and it's just becoming a much more viable, dynamic wine region.
Okay. So Dick Ponzi,
Yes.
you loaded your family into a car and moved to Oregon to start a winery. What were you thinking?
Oh, gosh. We were thinking of getting out of California. That was our first stop. No, really, actually, we had this crazy notion that we wanted to start a vineyard, and we wanted to get back to the earth. And but before that, there were several years of research of a sort. I was an aerospace engineer.
So, Dick, tell me what made you choose Oregon. What did you like about Oregon?
Well, okay. Well, in selecting a wine region, we realized that Oregon was a cool climate region. And we understood Pinot Noir, and we understood that Pinot Noir would do best in a cool climate. And we did some research to see that this may be the place. And we went to several other areas across the West Coast. We went to Mendocino area, British Columbia, and this seemed to be better suited, and it was something that we were really familiar with.
But why Pinot Noir? What was your attraction?
Well, you know, Pinot Noir was a variety that we really enjoyed drinking from red Burgundy, as a red Burgundy. And we sensed that there was some difference between what we were experiencing as we lived in California of a Pinot Noir from California versus a red Burgundy. And that led us to do a little more research and a little more understanding of why the Pinot Noir that's grown in Burgundy was so different than what was grown in the Napa Valley. So that's what got us started.
But when you started, was Pinot Noir something people wanted?
Oh, no, not at all. Pinot Noir was probably a secondary variety out of California. And it was one that most people didn't really understand, and most people didn't want to even work with it, I would think.
But now, especially in Oregon, it's considered Oregon Pinot Noirs are considered world class. How did you get from a wine nobody wanted to this point today?
Well, it's world class, but there were many steps on the way, of course, and picking the right area for growing that grape was very important. And so that was the #1 priority, as to where would you plant this grape if you had your choice. And knowing a little bit of Burgundy and a little bit of Alsace, this seemed to match that kind of climate.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the early days a little bit. So you loaded your family in the car, you did some research, you loaded them in the car, and you said, okay, Oregon, here we come. And your wife said, are you out of your mind? Right?
Well, no, not actually. I think we were very idealistic. We wanted to get back to the soil. We wanted to put our hands into a new adventure. And we were young, and it seemed like a wonderful idea. And so we just took the chance. We loaded the kids up in a truck and a car with a dog and a cat and a canoe and a piano, and that's all we needed. So we made the trip.
Well, then it must have been really easy. I mean, you had all the things you needed, right? I mean, to start a vineyard.
Well, you know, I'll tell you, I was so naive that I thought as an engineer I could come up to Oregon, I could spend some time researching, maybe come up with some major miracle kind of product or machine or something and make a living at that and grow the grapes as a sideline and keep us going. As it was, you know, things didn't quite work out that way. But a position did open at the local university or at the college, and it allowed me to teach and to grow grapes. It was a perfect combination, and so I jumped on it, and we searched around for the land and the location we wanted to settle, and it happened right here.
Can you tell me how your background as an engineer, how you've drawn upon that to evolve your business?
Well, I think it was, you know, I don't think the engineering gave me the confidence that I think we could have done it. I think if it hadn't been for my background, that is the family that I was raised with in terms of being close to wine at home and the food and the beverage always being on the table, I don't think we ever would have arrived at this point. I would have been just an aficionado of wines and drunk wines and be very happy with it. But we decided that we could do it. I had some experience at home, and I figured that we could do it. So we tried it.
Well, you are known for innovations in winemaking. Let's start with the barrels here. Tell us your philosophy on barrels.
Well, the barrels came, I think, further down the line. I think you have to understand the process and how the process really developed. I think for Oregon, for Pinot Noir, actually, you know, I think back now 35 years or so and think, you know, pretty much everything we do now is pretty much what we always have done. But then, as you reflect back, you begin to think about what you were doing, what we were doing, and how we arrived at where we're at. So it's like learning a process and assuming that no one else had done it before. And that's pretty much what we did. First of all, I relied on what we did at home, you know, for home winemaking, and worked on that principle. And quickly we realized that Pinot Noir, once the grapes were ripe, you know, there wasn't any source of fruit when we came up here. So we had some period of time, maybe 3-4 years, to at least learn and educate ourselves. And the education really came from Europe and came from the textbooks coming out of Europe, because we realized of that similarity between Burgundy and Alsace and Oregon. So it took us 3 or 4 years to pick up as many ideas as we could from Europe in our travels in Europe. And then when the day came, when the harvest came, we had some inclination what we would do and how we would do it. And went to the extent of making our own first crusher and making our own first press. I mean, that was, that was I think the going back to my childhood days, because you had to make everything in order to make it, to do it. And so went to that extent, and that's where the engineering probably came into it. So we made our own stemmer and we destemmer, and we made our own press and went that way. But the important thing was that I relied pretty much on what we did at home and how we did it, which was all by hand, which was pretty much, you just take the stems off, sometimes by hand, and you put it in the press, and you press it by hand, basically, and you move the wines pretty much with buckets and whatever you had without the use of pumps and things. So that's the beginning of it, and interesting enough, that's the way we made wines for 3 or 4 years. And then as production got up, we realized that we had to get some equipment, real equipment, something that you could buy off the shelf and do it. And interesting enough, when we started doing that, we realized that wines were changing. Something was happening to the wine because we had mechanized ourselves in the traditional way. And that set us back for a couple years. And I must say that it wasn't just myself, but it were other winemakers who again wanted to expand their production and buying this sleek equipment that came out of Europe to make their wines. And they recognized similar problems. The wines were changing. So I think if you were to look at that kind of experimentation and the results, you see that every step of the way, the process of making Pinot Noir is not the process for making the heavier reds, the Cabernets, the Zinfandels. And that was quickly realized, maybe not quickly, I mean after 3 or 4 years of this. So I began to, and along with other people in the exchange of information, to look at every part of the process, from the harvest to the transporting of the fruit, to the equipment that you moved the fruit, and how you took the stems off and how you fermented. And so the size of the containers that you carry the fruit, the conveyors rather than in screws. So the whole handling of the fruit from the beginning right through to the fermentation and how you function with the fermentation had to be done in a very careful and delicate way. The grape was different than most other red grapes, and we recognized that. And so you hear about gravity systems. You hear about the avoidance of pumps as much as possible with Pinot Noir. And that is really the beginning. And I must say that it was really the beginning of American Pinot Noir, because the difference that I recognized in California of Pinot Noir versus red Burgundy was partly because of that difference, the process, and the process itself, other than the location of where the fruit came from. So it is a different variety. It is a variety that requires this delicate handling. And every step of the way, one has to be very conscious of what are you doing to the fruit? What are you doing to the wine? What are you doing to the juice? How are you bottling? How are you moving it? And so this is, to my way of thinking, an important part of the original process, the beginnings of how to make Pinot Noir. Well, I mean, that's been going on now for 30 years, 25 years, and we take it for granted.
Did you develop those ideas?
No, not me alone. I think, as I say.
But in Oregon, where the...
Oh, yeah, I think this is Oregon. And you have to understand what was happening in the industry, even in California. I mean, it wasn't... the difference with Oregon was it was an Oregon industry. The use of oak barrels, French oak barrels, which we take for granted, sure, were used to some extent in California, but predominantly was American oak, because they were dealing with a variety that did best with American oak. I remember when the first shipment of barrels came in from France. That was an exciting thing for Oregon. French barrels? Why do we have to go to France for barrels when you can go out of Kentucky or Missouri and get all kinds of barrels? So that was, as an industry, that was an innovation. Today we take it for granted. Take it for granted. But we didn't just land on using French oak. We used Yugoslavian oak. I tried to get some oak out of Italy, used American oak, and we arrived at this, that this was the match for Pinot Noir. And so consequently, you know, this is one of Oregon's innovations, because as an industry, it was pretty much decided that this is the oak we were going to use. But then we went beyond that. If you can see, some of these barrels here are from Oregon now. Oregon oak. Well, why Oregon oak? Why not just Missouri oak? Well, we realized in the beginning, again, in searching for the barrel, that Oregon oak was, wow, you know, there's a lot of similarities between this Oregon oak and this French oak. And not at all any similarities between what was coming out of eastern United States in terms of barrels. So that innovative process even carried us to where we have Oregon oak barrels, similar to French oak barrels to some degree. So the innovations, I think, continue even to this day, although a lot of the standard procedures are pretty much accepted as always been there. And sometimes that's hard to understand and realize that there was a lot of development and research that went into it. I would say the first 10 years of our winemaking was just that, developing the technique and the process for Pinot Noir.
Okay, this may be a dumb question. You may have already answered it within that wonderful speech there, but did you also touch on the important enological practices? I mean, because those sound like more mechanical.
Those are mechanical, but they're enological. They affect the wine making.
Yeah, he could touch on yeast things and fermentation practices and things like that if he wants to. One of the natural lead-ons from where he left right there might also be, even though we're going to hear a little bit about Steamboat from Steve Carey, is that we not only influenced Oregon in the first 10 years, but we dragged other people in like California and the entire worldwide Pinot Noir.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. As a matter of fact, that you know, the question is, were we the only ones doing this? Well, there was a period. I mean, this was in the 60s, 70s. Probably the biggest innovations were taking place through the 70s and early 80s. And we realized that we weren't the only people now in America working with Pinot Noir. And there was a time when we were approached, or we approached people out of California who, to their minds, also realized that something wasn't right in this warm climate of California. There must be something that they're doing wrong. So there was even exchange with our fellow winemakers in a warmer region who were looking to making Pinot Noir. And so the process really was bouncing ideas off of everybody's head at that time. And so there were serious people in other areas, particularly the California area being one of the only regions at that time, who were interested in also making true Pinot Noirs. And so that exchange really started mushrooming, and it mushroomed into finally a collaboration of all Pinot Noir producers, where we isolated ourselves in a wonderful fishing camp in Oregon to discuss Pinot Noir. And that was, to my way of thinking, a wonderful exchange of information, because there it wasn't regional, it was the variety, dealing with this really fickle variety. And it was fickled, and to this day it's still fickled. I mean, you may find that if you buy a bottle of Pinot Noir, you're going to be very disappointed. But on the other hand, you may be exalted in terms of what you get out of it. And I don't know of any other variety of grape that can give you that surprise, but also that degree of pleasure. So that's why even young people coming to Oregon now, they have this real drive to make the great Pinot Noir. It's the ultimate in winemaking. You know, it's that challenge.
Obviously, a lot of energy and a lot of love goes into making this wine. How do you keep it affordable?
Well, that is a problem, because the grape in itself, by nature, is low yielding. By nature, responds to the weather more than probably any other variety. If we get, you know, average kind of cool weather through the summer, the grape is going to suffer from it. And it also is not going to be quite as rewarding. So one has to compensate. We have techniques that we developed in terms of sorting the fruit. We don't just dump the fruit into the processing equipment, but we have to look at this fruit and make sure that it's clean fruit, that it doesn't have mold on it because of what kind of conditions we might get in Oregon. And we have to separate. And sometimes what you have on the table to keep is less than what you dumped onto the ground. And there have been years like that. So consequently, you're not getting, you're paying the dollars for all this fruit, but you're not getting the juice that you would like. Cost goes up. There's just no way to mass produce a great Pinot Noir. You can make a good Pinot Noir, but I think most people in Oregon have come here to make that great Pinot Noir. But I think as we go along, I think we're going to learn more about the variety in terms of growing it so that we can grow it in a way that we can get true Pinot Noir in terms of character and maybe reduce the price to the level that would be more to the common person. One of the problems in Oregon, even when we were selling wines at $7 a bottle, Pinot Noir at $7 a bottle, most Oregonians thought that was too expensive. They could buy a jug for $7. So how do you convince somebody that this is something so different, and yet it's happening because there's more of it available, more people are experiencing it, and more people are demanding better Pinot Noirs. So once you get them hooked, you'll find that people just find this variety so versatile in terms of it's matched to food, it's matched to flavors. The flavors that it has are just captivating.
Well, you were talking about how difficult it can be and how temperamental it can be. Are there particular ways that you've dealt with the uncertainties of the weather?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we've learned. And much of that begins in the vineyard. Much of that begins where you plant the grapes. We've made a point in our own vineyards, for example, to have vineyards at lower elevations so that when we have a cool season, those grapes are going to ripen more fully. If we have a real hot season could be bad for the fruit too. It's not necessarily the best thing in the world. It could be the worst thing. So we have a fruit at higher elevation. So we try to compensate for the variations in the weather, and that's why we do a lot of blending from high vineyards, low vineyards, a vineyard on one side of the Chehalem Mountains versus a vineyard on the other side, matching microclimates in the fruit so that you can come up with some kind of consistency and possibly greatness in the wine.
Can you explain a little bit more about the blending? I know that Oregon has really strict rules about
That's right.
going to the bottle.
Yeah, and when we say blending, we're talking all 100% here Pinot Noir. But when we're talking about blending, we're talking, as I was mentioning, higher elevations, lower elevations, one vineyard site with another vineyard site. With you have kind of an image of what you think the best Pinot Noir should be, and you do this alchemy and work in your lab to make the components or the proportions of one vineyard versus another vineyard. As you can see here, this is from one vineyard, this particular barrel. That barrel there is from another vineyard. We may use a portion of this vineyard with a portion of that vineyard to make the best wine that we can make. So that's the blending process when I talk about blending. Sometimes there's blending of all different varieties, but I think that's the importance of blending, is to create the wine that you as an image have for a great Pinot Noir.
I thought the best Pinot Noirs were single vineyard ones.
Well, there are many theories about single vineyard wines, and they can be the greatest. And the question I have is, can they be the greatest every year? Single vineyards are generally implied that vineyard has a certain characteristic. And if you buy it today and you buy it next year at another, it should have some character that carries it through, that you could recognize from one year to the next. And that is a possibility. We have vineyards here that that replicate itself every year. In other words, you could go through the barrels here, and there are many vineyards here, and you could make us, if you are familiar with the vineyard, you would say, this is from that vineyard, because I've tasted it before in other vintages, and I know the characteristics. And that is a vineyard designated condition where you can do that every year. However, sometimes you don't want to do your bottling that way. Sometimes you prefer to bottle because a great vineyard may enhance something from a weaker vineyard, and the combination is something better than the parts. And that's what's exciting to me anyway. That's what's exciting. And it happens. I'm telling you, it happens. It's a miraculous thing. And to be able to predict that is almost impossible. You have to go through the blending operation and tasting, and you see these miraculous things that happen where the parts, the blend is better than the parts.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes in this winemaking business in Oregon, and you've seen the new families come through. What do you think about the fact that right now there's 252 wineries?
Well, I'll tell you, I was excited by the caliber of people who are coming in. The grape variety brings them in, and that's number one. If they're enthralled with Pinot Noir, they must understand that it's a difficult grape and that they have to sacrifice something to come here. I don't think we're ever going to find the size of wineries that you see in other wine regions where there's doing 100,000, 200,000 cases. It just wouldn't happen with this variety because we don't have the climate for that kind of intensity. Our yields are very low. But the people who are coming in, I feel, by a large part, are people who have a real interest in this variety. It's our variety, and you can't do this everywhere in the United States. The climate dictates where you can do it. That's the number one thing.
So the influx of new people is not diminishing the quality?
I think there's better quality coming in. Sometimes what happens is the interpretation of Pinot Noir can be distorted. You know, and I don't mean to criticize the press at all, but the press could dictate the styles, and sometimes the impression could be distorted in terms. I mean, you have a preference for a beverage, maybe coffee, for example, or if you like certain coffees, you may not like very strong coffees, and other people may like more delicate coffees with more flavors to them, that kind of thing. And you find that with wine, that you can change the character of the wine by the process and the way you blend it. So that can be happening in the industry, the distortion of the variety. And that's, I guess, if I were to be concerned about anything, that's what I would be concerned of. But that's a personal thing. You know, that's a personal preference, distorting the character. Because that's what brought us to Oregon, was the character of this grape. And the fact that the character wasn't replicated in the warmer climate.
So, tell me again about going to Burgundy.
Well, I think one of the interesting things that's happened, again, in the world of Pinot Noir, is that we brought the world of Pinot Noir together, where people from all over the world are talking about Pinot Noir. The Steamboat Conference, for example, is a place where everybody is invited. Californians, New Zealanders, French, Italians, Germans, and even Oregonians. So it's a place where they all come together, and I think it's a place where they have realized that they could talk about it freely, openly. Whereas, you know, when you're isolated in your own little commune, maybe in Burgundy, you just make the wine the way your father made it or the way your neighbor makes it, and that's it. But young people are involved in that winemaking, and they have the curiosity of how to improve their product as well. So I think even though Oregon is so young, it's kind of a help those new industries, old industries, Burgundy, new industries, New Zealand, to look at Pinot Noir and to just look at it and see what they can do in their regions in terms of making the wine. And that's wonderful. And I think that's something that Oregon had an instrumental part in doing. It brought people together. And this steamboat was a wonderful collection of people. I mean, you can't imagine the stature of some of these people who came there. It made them humble. You know, we were all on level ground at that point. And that goes for everybody. People who've been in the business for centuries came there. Families have come there and talked about it. So that's a contribution that Oregon has made.
What's your favorite part of winemaking?
Blending these wines, and as I mentioned, seeing the what comes out of it. It's a miraculous experience, and I'll have to tell you that the other part of that experience is to be able to sit down with my daughter and taste with her. To me, what could be better? It's fantastic. I mean, because it's an exchange back and forth, and boy, I feel very proud about that.
Tell me a little bit about your daughter, Louisa.
Louisa, she's the winemaker. She came upon it because she liked cooking, she liked science, and decided, well, she better do something with her education, and she obviously was familiar with all the winemakers who came here from France and Italy, and got familiar with that lifestyle and that excitement that they always brought to the winery. And so she decided to go to Burgundy and spend a year. And her I think, the best experience she had was drinking great Pinot Noirs. Not the process, not necessarily going through it all, but living in that environment and tasting wonderful Pinot Noirs, which really helps her in her palate now, I think.
So it's been a family affair.
Oh, yeah.
Bring together Steamboat and the family affair, the fact that she and Eric met there.
Oh, yeah, and there are romances that happen at Steamboat. I remember one couple got married at Steamboat. People come back as a reunion to meet, and my daughter Louisa met her husband there. And he's a winemaker, and she's a winemaker, so it was something very common.
Great.
And you should see what they blended together, some beautiful grandchildren.
Touche. The ultimate